thank you for joining us today. My name is Ben Klosek. I'm Dennis Klosek's son and his co-collaborator in all of the wildness that we've got going on at DennisKlosek.com with the School of Soil, Soul, and Spirit. And this little event today is inspired by you all asking so many wonderful questions about Dennis's first and recently published book, the Biodynamic Book of the Moons. And I have a copy here. It's a pre-press copy, so it has a little band across it. But if you've picked it up, you'll hopefully be delighted at its size, which means it's a little more portable than the first version. Dennis originally had thought, let's have that be the size, and the publisher wanted it to be a coffee table book and things like that. So after conversation with him, we decided let's bring it back in a more convenient size. So hopefully you appreciate that. And this book really is a labor of love, both the original and the republishing. This is the 40th anniversary version, and it's clear to me that even back when I was 4 years old, when this was published, my birthday was a couple days ago, that Dennis was deep into really magical things in his thinking and his perception of the world. And when I read it in my 20s, I thought, this is a really important book, and knew at some point that I was going to redesign it, lay it out, and put it out into the world. But it's taken 20 years for that to happen. And much of that happening is due to the Ouroboros Institute, which Dennis started with a friend of his, Patricia, years ago. And they have a wonderful board and many, many wonderful donors who have supported his work for years and years and years. And they were the drive behind, the financial drive behind making this happen. And they helped with my time to do the layout and design and pre-press and the printing and the publication and the marketing now. So a big, big thank you to Ouroboros and all its donors. It's been really such a joy to work with them. And I want to thank you all for asking over the years, can I get a copy of the Book of the Moons somewhere? For a couple weeks there since it released, we were #1 on organic gardening and nature study on Amazon, which was kind of neat to see. And hopefully many of you have had a chance to start reading it. If you haven't, you're welcome to go to the website, and you can download the first chapter and kind of take a look and check that out. Dennis's inspiration for the Book of the Moons was the agricultural course by Rudolf Steiner. And as those of you who've read it probably know, it's difficult. It's a difficult read. There's a lot of really dense material, and it requires a real flexibility of thinking to be able to understand the agricultural course. And so I see this Book of the Moons as kind of a stepping stone into the more esoteric components of the agricultural course. And I'm actually reaching out to biodynamic groups around the world right now to suggest that they put the Book of the Moons on their syllabus for students to be able to kind of transition into the agricultural course with a little bit more understanding of the ideas behind it, given in Dennis's clear way that we all know and love. So thank you again for joining us today and sending us your questions. Today is sort of in the form of a Q&A, but in order that we field as many questions as possible and kind of put them into a package that lets Dennis address them in a more fluid way, we've asked for questions beforehand, and we collected many, many questions. I kind of collated them and put them into different categories. And And so if you have questions today that aren't addressed, or if you'd like to ask a question, you're welcome to put it into the chat. We may or may not get to it, but I have some resources at the end if we don't get to all the questions that can kind of help direct you to further resources that we have offered over the years, so that you can continue your own education. And we can let Dennis take a little break as he sometimes needs to, and we can all pursue our own course of study. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dennis up to the front here, and just say, Dad, it's been such a joy jamming with you on this and bringing this biodynamic work to the world, presenting these lectures and courses, and I'm just so excited to be able to kind of bring this thing full circle for you. So thank you for all the gifts you've offered the world. And I know it's not just me saying it. Many of our audience today have said it to me many times. So thank you. And yeah, let's hear what you have to share with us today.
Great. Thanks, Ben. And thank you for all this. When I saw it was a 40th anniversary, I go, I'm not that old, but I am. Yeah. So Ben suggested I show you, to begin with, the original copy of the Book of Moons. It's Xerox, and it has little potato print borders. And it's handwritten, hand-drawn, Capricorn, Mandala. That's the original form. And I did it because I was dumbfounded by Rudolf Steiner's agriculture course. I had no idea what he was talking about. But by that time, I had already encountered Goethe and some alchemical ideas. And I knew he was speaking alchemically, but I couldn't make. Well, here's a diagram here. This is an alchemical diagram. The snake bites its tail. It's called the Ouroboros. I couldn't make the snake bite its tail. I was somewhere in the middle going, what? And I realized that I needed to approach this problem in a kind of artistic way. That's my background. I have an MFA in painting and drawing. And my thesis was Goethe's color theory. So I already had a kind of a background in Goetheanism from graduate school. I had no idea about Steiner or anthroposophy or anything, and then came to agriculture course. And then it was like, oh, well, this guy's talking alchemy, but wow, this is really deep things he's doing here. So over the years, I've worked with it, and I've been a gardener for 50 years. And now I do plant research based on the same principles. So what I wanted to share with you today, just as an initiation of this dialogue, is 3 principles of alchemy that are, as I understand it, they're the basis of the work on the land. They're also the basis of medicine. And they're also the basis of what we could call education towards soul hygiene. Education towards the ability of the soul to take itself seriously when it gets in trouble. Because we're in trouble today. So there are 3 principles of alchemy, and they're all connected to each other. One is polarity. The other, as I just described to you, the snake biting its tail, it's called the Ouroboros, or the mandala, the alchemical mandala. And the third one is what is known as the method of analogy. And they're like stepwise levels of understanding. And you begin with polarity, you graduate towards the mandalic consciousness. And then once you can understand the mandalic consciousness, you begin to be exposed to some of the deepest mysteries of the natural world, which the alchemist said was an analog to the work on the soul. As above, so below. My soul is nature writ small, and my nature is my soul. My soul is nature, but my soul is smaller than nature, but has greater potential than nature. Because I'm a human and I'm free, and nature is very wise, but not free. So the alchemists understood that. They understood that they needed to take the substances of the natural world and transform them into a more spiritual condition. Today we call it medicine or art. I had a professor in graduate school who said, painting is pushing dirt and oil around with pig hairs tied to a stick. And pretty much that's the way it was, and pretty much that's the way it is. Winsor Newton would kind of have problems with that, but basically it's pig hairs tied to a stick pushing dirt around. So alchemy, the idea is that the substances of nature are pictures of something that is in the cosmos. And what is in the cosmos are imaginations of change. Imaginations of how things evolve and not only change, but have a yearning to connect to what is opposite from them. This is then called polarity. So in the most fundamental polarity of alchemy, there's the sun and the moon. So up there under the sun, it says silica, salt. And salt, to an alchemist, was a condition of manifestation. They said many things were salt, including a baby. So a baby manifests out of parent water, and it shows up and becomes a salt. That's the old expression, the human is the salt of the earth. The human is the manifestation of the spiritual potential of the earth. This is salt, because the human has in them a little sun, otherwise known as the human heart. And that sun, the silica, is a connection that the soul of a person has to the vertical stream, to the divine. That's the sun. And in the alchemical principle, the soul is a geometrical picture of this ordering of the cosmos. So you can take a cube of salt and put it in water and dissolve it, and it disappears into potential. And then you evaporate the water and it comes back, but it comes back again as a cube. The alchemist said, how does that happen? I said, that cube must exist somewhere in the cosmos as an idea. And then when it comes out of the cosmos, it gives us a picture of the reality of the cosmos. It's a cube. There are many, in Islam, the most sacred object is a cube. So that's the sun. Silica, salt, In alchemy and chemistry, it's known as the acidic pole. In plant growth, it's the picture of the vertical drive of the perennials. So a perennial has captured in itself the sun because it goes through many different suns. It's perennial. Apple tree can grow for a long time and bear fruit. It's perennial. It has captured the sun in itself. Some plants have captured so much sun that they actually have their fluids actually are kind of burning. That's resin and oil. So that's the sun principle. It's a manifestation of the cosmos, the vertical stream, the perennial stream. On the opposite side is the moon. The moon is a representative of calcium and potassium. And that was then known by the alchemists as sulfur. Well, why is it sulfur? Calcium comes from the word calx, C-A-L-X. That's an alchemical word, calx. Calx means ash. Potassium is also on that side. Well, what's that have to say? Potassium is potassium. So if you take wood and you burn it and you get ashes and you put water in it and pull it out, you have the most basic substance, lye, that is potash. It's the ash that you find in the bottom of a pot when you burn the wood. Potassium, potassium. And the sulfur process is a metabolic process. It's a burning or combustion process. You get calx and potash from a burning process, which is basically metabolism. And that metabolic principle in the plant life is the annual, because the annual goes from a seed to a seed in one season. It just hits the ground running and burns itself out. The alchemists would say that a flower is a living flame, and a seed is an ash. So the whole seed forming process is an ash process to an alchemist. And the plant that does that in one sun is the annual. And the annual uses not so much the force of the vertical drive, but the forces of the horizontal drive, because they are the forces of water. So potash and calcium have particular relationships to water. And Rudolf Steiner in the agriculture course makes great use of that kind of polarity when he talks about potassium and calcium, as opposed to the silicates. He's using an alchemical language when he talks about sun and moon, silica and calcium. It's the tradition since ancient Egypt. And between them, if we had only sun and moon, we'd have polarities that were opposites. But in nature, the opposites always have a deep yearning for completion, like, men and women. And when they do that, they have to come together. And when they come together, they form a buffering. And that buffering to the alchemists was known as mercury, where the salt becomes sulfur and the sulfur becomes salt. Because if I take the ash and I burn it, it becomes sulf. But then if I take the sulf and put it in water and take the water out, and then I evaporate the water, I get a salt. I get calcium carbonate. So the buffering of the mercury in the earth body is clay or alumina. Alumina is known as an amphoteric. It makes things that melt at different temperatures come closer together. The alchemist said that was mercurial. It was a buffer. And in the natural world, the buffering process of mercury is what science is very, very interested in today, because synthetic science since the 1700s, based on alchemy, is very adept at making salts of things and burning stuff. But they find that in burning stuff and making salts and synthetics, that the real problem is the buffering, the neurotransmitters, the hormones, the enzymes, the mercury, what in alchemists would call the mercury principle, or the life principle of the mercury, where salt becomes sulfur, sulfur becomes salt. So just to think in terms of polarity is a really good beginning when you want to understand that. So right up here, I put this little diagram to show you a typical polarity. So there's a picture of a cow under sun and a picture of the butt end of a cow under moon. That's from the agriculture course. Rudolf Steiner talks about the head principle and the horn receiving the cosmic forces, and then the metabolic side working with those forces and then depositing that in the meadow muffin, that those are right from the agriculture course. And he talks about that like sun and moon. You go, what the hell is he talking about? He's talking about these principles. And always in polarities, there are polarities within polarities. So if you have the head of a cow and you have the horns of a cow, the BD prep uses the horns of a cow, the 500 and 501. The 500, where you take a cow horn and you put the cow poop in it, that's an example of the snake biting its tail. You have the sun in the horn and the moon in the poop. And you put them together. Because in the cow, there's a great polarity of the buffering. That little diagram there, this one, the bone is calcium. That's salt. The sheath of the bone is hair. That's more silicious. It's like fur. Glass, they used to call it. The alchemists called fur glass. They called the horn hair is glass, salt. So the horn itself is a polarity that allows the hair to receive the distant cosmos and transmit it to the bone, and the bone gets its forces from the blood, which is the sulfur, the metabolic side. Okay? So that's an example of how Rudolf Steiner uses polarity in the agriculture course as a kind of symbolic language. So in the second diagram there with the snake biting its tail, that's called the Ouroboros, 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 the snake biting its tail, very ancient sign. And what it means is that everything has to come home. What goes around comes around. Everything that you start, you have to take it apart and break it apart and purify it and bring it back together again. That's the alchemical wedding. That snake is an image of the wedding of the opposites of the polarities. And it does so through, to begin with, the mandala of the four elements: earth, water, air, and fire. Earth is fixed nature, solid. Water is fluid nature, liquid. Air is the transcendent beginning of manifestation into spiritual principle, air. It's a rarefication. Alchemists said rarefication, vapor. And then finally, fire is the warp principle. If you want to go from earth to water, you apply fire. You want to go from water to air, you apply fire. You want to go from air to fire, you apply fire. today in physics, that's called phase shift. The earth is the solid phase, the water is the liquid phase, the air is the gaseous phase, the fire is the warmth phase. And in physics, the rule is if I want to go from earth to water, I need a certain amount of warmth to do it. But if I want to go from water to air, I need 7 times the amount of the original warmth to go from water to air as I do from earth to water. Think earth is ice. I want to melt ice. I have to have a certain caloric input of warmth to make it into water. But if I want to make the water into vapor, I have to use 7 times the amount of warmth in order to do that. If I want to move the vapor into pure warmth, I have to, again, use 7 times the amount of caloric input to make that happen. Physics calls that latent heat of phase transformation. The alchemists called it the Mandala of the 4 elements. So when we think earth, it's not only dirt, it's anything that's a solid. When we think of water, it's not just water, it's anything that's in a liquid form. So when you're reading these things, and Rudolf says water, he may be speaking an alchemical language. That's why you think he's talking about, quote, H2O, but he's talking about a whole other principle of what is liquid. So if we go from earth to water and we need heat to do it, we have to banish the cold, because the transition between earth and water is a phase shift where cold needs to be released in order that the water can gain its liquidity. If I want to go from water to air and do that phase shift, I have to apply more heat, and the water will go through a phase that the alchemists called moist. If I want to go from air to fire, I have to apply more heat, and the alchemists would say that goes through hot, the temperament of hot. If I want to go from fire to earth and I apply more fire, everything gets dry, carbon, ash. So cold, moist, hot, and dry are the names of the dynamics between earth, water, air, and fire. They are called temperings. Tempering means balancing. In order to banish the cold, I have to get earth and water into balance. In order to make the moist, I have to get water and air to balance with each other. Then I get vapor, etc., etc. Tempering means balancing. And everything in alchemy that especially when we get to medicine and ferments and trying to make substances finer than they are, everything requires tempering. And I have to ask myself, where am I starting? What are the polarities of this starting? What in this is salt? What in this is sulfur? Is it more sulfur than salt? Is it more salt than sulfur? How can I do that? And that process of tempering and getting the elements to move in alchemy is known as fermentation. So in fermentation, I am trying to get the snake to bite its tail. I take some plant material and I break it down and I put it in water and I let it rot. My earth goes into the water. When it rots, the earth becomes moist. And I have a condition of kind of fluid plant material known as must to you winemakers. And now out of the must, that the moisture of the must, comes the bacteria and the yeast that they operate to make first alcohol and then vinegar. The alcohol used to be called fire water because it's the heat principle out of the ferment. And the same with vinegar. And then the vinegar is then dry. The more alcohol I have in a wine, it's called to be drier. Why do they call it dry? Because there's more fire. So all these languages of today, you know, a dry wine, sweet wine, whatever. Sweet wine is a little moist. Dry wine has more alcohol. So that language of fermenting and making wine and making alcohol and also then making medicines follows the transformation of the four elements through the tempering processes of the four temperaments. And it is worth that snake there, that little diagram, that's worth a lifetime of study. I can tell you it has yielded more insight for me than any other thing. That snake there, that diagram. You know, if you're into tats, that's a really good one. Put it on your forehead. Okay, because it represents the great alchemy of everything. It's been co-opted today by some people who say it's evil. It's only evil if you're evil. If you're not evil, it's sacred. So, polarity. I have air and earth as polarity, water and fire as polarity, cold and hot are polarity, moist and dry are polarities. The four elements and the four temperaments balance the polarities. And if you learn how to work with them, if you learn how to plant with them, you'll see that the moon and the sun go through constellations where things become cold and things become moist and things become hot and things become dry. So all that work that Rudolf Steiner does with the sun and the moon and the planets and everything could be put exactly on that diagram in the middle, and you can play with it. We actually, do we have that banner? Are we doing that with the little moon wheel?
So a few years ago, maybe many years ago now, Dennis and I put together a wheel which basically lets you kind of program it for the season, for the day, for the month, and the moon, and it lets you kind of read the haiku of the seasons. And maybe what I could do is, for the folks who are here, we could send them the PDF. So if you wanted to print one out and kind of make one, homemade one yourself, you could. This is a really powerful way of starting to play with those elemental qualities and get a sense of what's going on
Through the season.
Through the seasons, based on where the moon is and the sun and everything. Yeah.
So once you understand this diagram there, you see that there are rotations every month, every moon. The word month means a moon. So every month, the moon moves through constellations that since time immemorial have been connected to cold, moist, hot, dry, earth, water, air, and fire. That's why the old alchemist said the moon is a lens of cosmic reality. And some people have a problem with it being a lens. They say, well, it's just as a rock. Yeah, but your satellite dish is also a lens. It focuses a signal. And then in the center of the satellite dish is a waveguide that is also a lens. And geologists call a dike in a volcanic region a lens. A pluton is a lens. It doesn't mean that it's just an optical lens. A lens is anything that seems to gather forces. Your head is a lens, if it works. If it doesn't, then, well, you need to have your satellite dish kind of maybe have a few pings in it, you know? So to call it a lens just means that it's moving in front of a set of planetary forces that since time immemorial have been seen as the root of moist, cold, wet, and dry. Around here in California, when the moon moves through water, we get dew. It's been, 108 degrees out there, and it'll be 100 in the hundreds for 4 or 5 days. But if the moon moves through water and I go out in the morning, all the little squash leaves and cucumber leaves have gutated fluid. They have dew. Where's that come from? It comes from the moon. So once you learn how to work with that little diagram there in the center, you can plug in planetary motion. And then you begin to understand above the ground and below the ground, the planets outside the sun, the planets inside the sun, all of that strange language that Rudolf Steiner uses in the agriculture course can be plugged in to that diagram right there, which is what that little wheel was that Ben showed you. We tried to make it easy for people to play with it, because that's the next level. Once you understand a little bit about the elements and the temperaments, and you can begin to think in terms of polarities working with each other, the next task is to understand probably the most fundamentally difficult, and how can I say it? To use the word bullshit, is where the method of analogy enables people to make stuff up. And that's a problem. But it also enables people to actually do very deep research. And that's not a problem. But it's the same thing. There's a car mechanic once told me, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. You want to go to adjust your valves, but you better really read the manual, So the method of analogy is a very high alchemy, and it is the basis of almost everything in the agriculture course and in biodynamics. That's why you put poop in a horn. That's why you put a plant in an animal organ. You're finding an analogy between the plant and the organ. So the old doctrine of that was called the doctrine of signatures. And that's a problem. And that's where the bullshit comes in. People think, oh, it looks like a liver, so it must be good for the liver. Oh, it looks like a lung, it must be good for the lung. And if you're lucky, it is. But if you're just making stuff up, it isn't. And the deeper you get into it, the more you have a tendency to believe that what you see is kind of what is. And that creates problems. And it has created problems even in biodynamics. I knew a very educated biodynamic teacher who used to say that the cow horn is pure silica. No, it's not at all pure silica, but it has a silica principle. You say, well, what's the silica principle? If you look at the molecular structure of a silicate like quartz, you see that it's rotating helices, moving all through that quartz crystal. And if you look at the form of the way in which the protein structure is in a cow horn, you see the same thing. That's the method of analogy. So Rudolf Steiner would say it's connected to silica process, but it's not pure silica. People used to say to me, well, so-and-so has said cow horn's pure silica. It can't be pure silica. That'd be a quartz crystal stuck in a cow's head. But it has an analogous principle of its molecular becoming. That's the best way I can say it. That seems a little obscure, but I'm trying to really force this out here. So the new way of looking at the method of analogy alchemically is called functional morphology. There's a wonderful book by a researcher called Rohen, Dr. Rowan, called Functional Morphology of the Human Being. It's difficult, but it's a good read. And many of the more advanced books by people like Frederick Benesch, book Apocalypse on gems and gem properties, Benesch, Benesch, called Apocalypse. It's about the 12 gems of the St. John's Revelation, or St. John's Apocalypse, and the properties of the gems and their activity in the biological sphere. That's a very high level of the alchemy of morphology. The functional morphology, Goethe called it the becomings. So functional morphology, Rowan, thanks, Ben. So books like that, Pelikan, Secrets of Metals, Pelikan, Secrets of Metals. Wonderful book, very difficult. There's all the medical works that Rudolf Steiner did, connecting up nerve and blood. Nerve is salt, blood is salt. And if you understand that, the medical lectures start to make sense because they're about functional morphology, or the resonance between different becomings of things. So in my work 40 years ago, I had no idea what a becoming was or what a morphology was. But over the years, I've been led through the Ouroboros to understand that there is a deep secret in the natural world of what Goethe would call yearnings or becomings. And even Steiner in the agriculture course said limestone is a yearning. And a yearning means that somewhere, it's like that old song, some enchanted evening, there will be a stranger, where is my TL? Everything in nature is yearning for its completion. That's called the soul of nature. Everything. And in today's world, there's been tremendous research done. The last little thing down at the bottom, metallic ion transport. Ions of metals, potassium, magnesium, calcium, iron, and things like phosphorus are continually yearning to move to a higher state of being. And the transport that they bring is the function of morphological relationships. So back in the day, to give you an example, I had the idea that a quartz, the amethyst crystal, would have something to do with helping lettuces form heads. And it looked to me like the geode of an amethyst kind of was like a lettuce head. It was kind of an intuition, but I didn't understand it. I just took some amethyst and crunched it up and made it very fine and sprayed it on my lettuce plants and did a control. And sure enough, when I sprayed the amethyst on lettuces, the ones that were sprayed with the amethyst are very, very, very fine grinding. That was a whole learning process in itself. Very fine grinding. And then in water and spray, the ones that were sprayed formed better heads. Like, who knew? Go figure. Like, what's that have to do with anything? And I could have stopped there and then made up a bunch of stuff and said, this is what you do and do this. But that's not the way an alchemist would work. They would go, well, why does that work? And what I found out was that the amethyst is a special crystal form known as a Brazil twin. And the Brazil twin form has a great deal to do with the titanium and potassium and calcium relationships that is in the melt that is actually a solid solution. And at different temperatures, one of the electrolyte metals will dominate a form of a crystal that shoots off at an angle. And then that exhausts that particular form in that crystal so that the solution immediately shifts to shooting another crystal at a different angle. And then that exhausts the solution so that the original angle then shoots and then back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. The crystals that form, microcrystals that form, are twins. They form at different angles. So when you shine a light into it, the light rotates around and alternates between one form and the other. They call it feathering. Well, if you're a gardener and you look at lettuce, guess what you will see? You will see a feathering of the little baby leaves rotating around the common center, receiving light. To me, that was pretty good. I said, wow. And then I understood that metallic ion transport was the basis of many, many different crystal forms. And so my research of the past 10 years has been to grind up a lot of gems and to spray them on plants and to take notes and to watch what's happening as a functional morphological way of enhancing plant growth. It's an alchemy that was very much inspired by Rudolf Steiner's preparation 501, where you put quartz in a cow horn, and then you're amplifying the quartz by a form that has a resonant morphological affinity between the quartz and the protein structure of the hair. Okay, alchemy. So I didn't want to take all the time by kind of, but I wanted to say to you that these three principles of polarity, the mandala, and the method of analogy can take you very, very, very far in your work in biodynamics.
That is rich. So a part of our kind of context that we were going through was looking at this collection of questions and saying, what are the real questions at the heart of these questions, so that Dennis was able to bring this sort of distilled down question of what are the preps, where does the impulse arise from that the preps can be looked at through, and how might we come up with more preps? And so over the past years, Dennis has been working diligently in the garden, as he said, grinding up different gems and things, and looking at what are the different qualities. And so part of what we've been sharing in the Soil, Soul, and Spirit work, both the YouTube videos and the school, are resources that are directing you all towards the ways that you can start to look at developing ones for your particular situations. Because Dennis has been so rigorous in his research that the principles have been borne out to the degree where they're really solid. And so I wanted to bring your attention a little bit to a place on the website that is what we call the school. You can get to it right in this top menu here. And in the school, there are 6 or 7 main areas of study. We're kind of constantly playing with these a little bit. We're working on adding an education one as well. But the way that they're organized is when you go into a given section, Dennis spent a lot of time putting together these principles at the top of each section. And if you were to take time to go through these different principles, it would start to answer many of the questions that you might have, maybe that we didn't have a chance to get to today. And then down below, the articles really are those principles in application. And so for today's work, we'll look just at the biodynamics, but you can see there's many other subjects. One of the core questions was about, how do I do my own inner work so that I can better understand biodynamics or be a better biodynamic farmer or gardener? And so what I've done is I've pulled together a list of resources here, and I'll send this to you all, that are categorized based on the different subjects that you asked about. So here's a link to the school, so you can jump in on that. But biodynamic inner development, I found at least 6 different lecture sets that speak directly to how you can develop your own capacity for seeing in this way that Dennis has described, where these principles of polarity, of the alchemical mandala, and the method of analogy become second nature to you, so that when you're working in your property, in your garden, you can start to see in the way that he does. And I can attest to the effectiveness of these. As I've been working with him over the years, listening to his lectures, applying these things in my own garden, my own capacity for seeing in this way continues to grow. And it's really exciting, because then you start to actually see the deeper meaning behind what's happening, and the application of your efforts can really bear amazing fruit. If these feel a little bit too much, there were some sort of fundamental questions about BD essentials. There's 3 here: the core principles of biodynamics, to every season turn, which talks about the timing of biodynamics, and then sacred agriculture, which is really tying together this question of inner development and the work on the land, so that we can see this biodynamic practice as a sacred practice. And then there were questions about the future of biodynamics. What is the future of biodynamics? How can we start to bring new impulses to it? How do we work towards making it something that is not just for Demeter certification only, and to have a higher price on your product, but actually starts to support the development of human evolution? And then last, if you're curious about this elemental piece, there's a lecture called The Transformation of Substance, which goes into these principles in much more depth. I think it's a 4-lecture series. And then last, I'm super excited to share with you that in a couple weeks, this starting August 4th, we have a new course coming out, and it's called Gem and Plant. And it's been years in the making. And it essentially gives you the tools to learn how to come up with your own biodynamic preparations as a farmer. As a healer, it will give you the tools to be able to develop processes in your garden so that the remedies that you give for your patients are at a whole other level. And then finally, as an educator, Dennis takes us deeply into this method of analogy and principles that allow you to understand how might I better be able to teach chemistry, botany, biology in a way that's holistic and isn't just based on contemporary science, which we know is a bit more reductionist right now. And so I would encourage, if you're a farmer, a healer, or a gardener, or an educator, that you check this out. And what it's going to look like is it's an online course, and it will be 9 sessions. And we're going to do a Friday evening session from 5 to 6 Pacific. And then we'll do a Saturday morning 2 sessions from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Then we'll take a little break, and then 10:30 to 11:30. And it's happening between August 4th and, that should be September 23rd. And so just a little bit of time, all the sessions will be recorded. And there's a little bit of theory, like what we've gotten today, where Dennis explains, like he was talking about the twinning and the amethysts, or the development of the quartz structure, what metallic ion transfer looks like. But then he also takes us into his lab and shows us, how do I break down that amethyst crystal to actually turn it into something? How do I prepare the plant material so that I can make a substance that's at a higher order of effectiveness than just the gem spray itself? And so if you're interested in that, I'll be sending, well, let me just drop this link into the chat right now, so you can take a look at that as you like. But I'll also send out all these links once we're wrapped up here, so that you can kind of take these questions a bit deeper. So thank you all so much for coming today. It's been really such a joy to have you with us. And I really appreciate you taking the time to ask questions. And one element of this gem and plant, if you're wanting to kind of get in there with a bit more specific questions, is we'll be doing about a 10-minute presentation, and then we'll have about 15 minutes of live Q&A, where you'll be able to ask your question and then have Dennis respond right there. And then we'll do the next segment of presentation, and then more live Q&A. So we'll have those 9 sessions. We'll have probably a good 45 minutes per session that are really based on dialoguing with Dennis live. So if that's of interest to you, we encourage you to join us for that. And we're super excited about being able to offer this, because there's nothing like it. I've talked to lots of BD folks, and there's nothing like it out there to be able to take BD preps to a whole next level. So thank you, everyone, for jumping in. And feel free to email further questions. I'm going to be responding a bit to the ones that have already been asked and giving a little more direction on where to find things in our resources. So again, thank you so much. And we hope you have a sweet evening. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yes. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Dennis. We love you.
Thank you.